Okay. So let's look at maybe the first page of the study guide. Um, First page of the study guide. Is there anything in here that might be helpful you think we could talk about? I could kind of answer questions about, or like Mr. Barth, I don't know, we were talking about this, or can we talk about this a little bit more? Anything? Yeah. So push factor is a reason why a person leaves their home country. Think of it as this is a reason why they're pushed out of their home country. A pull factor is a reason why they go to the place they immigrate to. So pull factor is why would they come to this new place? Why would they come to the Americas? Okay. So if we look at push and pull factors for exploration, what are some reasons why different people left England? What pushed them out of England? Maybe like religious persecution. Maybe religious persecution. What about people who came over to be indentured servants? What was the push factor from Europe?
Like getting land.
Yeah, so like a lack of land in Europe. That's also called social economic immobility, meaning if you're born poor, you're going to be poor your whole life. If you're on the bottom part of society, you're going to be there your whole life. So you're going to kind of stuck wherever you're at. Okay, so if that's the reason why people are being pushed, what are some reasons why people are pulled to the Americas? Yeah, so maybe resources. Okay. We especially see this with like the Spanish, right? Crops that you can sell, right? Tobacco is grown really well in Virginia. You can't grow in Europe, or not as well. Same with sugar. So you go to the Americas for the resources. A lot of the pull factors are just opposites also of the push factors. So religious tolerance. Now, the societies they created sometimes were intolerant of other religions, like I'm thinking the Puritans, right? They faced religious persecution. They came over to the Massachusetts area where they could practice their own religion, but I wouldn't necessarily say they were religiously tolerant, right? But they have the ability to practice their religion in their colony. Okay. Opposite, lack of land, lots of land. Social economic immobility. There's at least an understanding that there should be mobility. There's a hope for economic mobility. So if you're born poor in England, you can come over to be an indentured servant and you can gain wealth and gain land. Did that actually happen though? For most indentured servants, no, right? Most indentured servants ended up staying and working on the plantation they were working on their whole during their whole contract period. Okay. So we see a lot of the goals of colonization here in these pull factors, right? These are the reasons why people are coming to the Americas specifically instead of going somewhere else. Good. Makes sense. We just didn't use the phrase push factor, pull factor, but we talked about these ideas. Anything else from page 1?
Did ask, so I should ask you that.
Oh, a couple things for the Aztecs.
Teacher is from
So for Aztecs, you have the city of Tenochtitlan. It's on page 1. It's the second thing down. How did Aztecs transform into adaptive environment? One is Tenochtitlan. You remember like what was geographically significant about Tenochtitlan? Like if you saw it from overhead, what did it look like?
Islands like in a lake.
Yeah.
They have like bridges.
Islands.
Say
that again? Yeah. So with this island city, it kind of creates like this central hub. And it kind of looks like a bicycle wheel, right? Where in the middle you have Tenochtitlan, the hub of the bike, and you have these spokes with the bridges going out to the outer rim. And from the outer rim, it creates vast trade routes because now the Aztecs are able to trade with not only communities within their empire, but other empires as well. In their own empire, but also with other empires like the Mayans and everything. So then we see that through archaeological digs, we can find Mayan artifacts in places where Aztecs lived. And so that proves that there was trade going on. So they're adapting to their environment by trading with other communities if they don't have the resources in that location. So I would talk about those two things for Aztecs transforming. But in our class, we talked about other groups too who are adapting to and transforming their environment. This is the third one down. I think one of the biggest ones we've talked about was Native Americans in the Great Plains. Yep, because this is in like present day Mexico. And this is in places like Nebraska, the Dakotas. Like this would go under like the third one. How did Native Americans in the Americas transform adaptive environment? Yeah. So this one is the second thing on your bullet point, and this goes into the third one. Okay. So how did Native Americans adapt to and transform their environment? How did Native Americans specifically here in the Great Plains do that? Adapt to their environment. Buffalo. Nice. Because remember, bison are a migratory animal. And so because of that, Native Americans in the Great Plains are nomadic or semi-nomadic, meaning they move around with the bison. So we don't have permanent villages here in the Great Plains as much. Doesn't mean it was impossible, but for most communities, nomadic where they move with the migration of bison and other animals. Compared to other communities like on the East Coast, I'm thinking of one we've come back to a couple times in North Carolina, Secotén. What did we see? That's the one with the image. What did we see in that image that shows they're transforming or adapting to their environment? Okay, so buildings. So East Coast. So buildings, that shows an example of permanent villages. What else did we see in that map? We saw farming. Farming and agriculture. But in the Great Plains, we don't see that as much, right? Because you can't stay in one place and do the farming and tend to the crops if you're moving around, following the bison. Depending on where you lived, could change how your community has to adapt to the bison. Anything else from page 1 of your study guide? The 2, yep.
Is that the Colombian exchange? It's like triangle trade. Is it like the same thing?
Yeah, so that's kind of one of the problems with historians talking about this time period, because a lot of times they like talking about the same thing in just different words, or very similar things, but different words and just very nuanced differences. Like, okay, so we got Americas over here, Africa over here, and Europe over here. Anything that goes across the ocean is the Columbian Exchange. Anything that goes across the ocean, that transfer is the Columbian Exchange. Historians also use the term triangle trade, and that's the cycle that we talked about in class of resources, finished goods, and then kidnapped and enslaved Africans brought in this cycle called the triangle trade. We also talked about how just one leg of this this triangle is the Middle Passage. Right. So all of these words have something to do with trade, right? But historians like to refer to like specific parts of this as a specific thing. So, right, Columbian Exchange is anything that moves across the ocean. Triangle trade is talking specifically about this cycle that goes in this way, this clockwise formation. And then the Middle Passage is specifically kidnapped, enslaved Africans being taken across the Atlantic Ocean. Now, one other phrase that was mentioned in an essential question that we used is Atlantic economy. And Atlantic economy is basically the same thing as the Columbian Exchange, only you're focusing on making money through trade across the Atlantic. Is Atlantic economy in your study guide? I can't remember if you actually put that phrase in there. We might see this phrase, okay? It's essentially anything of trade going across the Atlantic Ocean, making money off that, you're creating an Atlantic economy, okay? If you're just talking about how Europe is trading with itself, that's not the Atlantic economy because it has nothing to do with the Americans. But if they're getting resources and making something out of it and then selling it, that's a part of the Atlantic economy. All the words are talking about very similar things, but there's like these subtle nuances between them, which makes it difficult, right? If the question is asking you about the Columbian Exchange, the question might be answered differently if it's talking about the Middle Passage, right? Those aren't exactly the same thing, but they all are kind of part of each other. It's almost like in math, like a square is a rectangle, but a rectangle is not necessarily a square, right? It's kind of like that. Middle Passage is part of the Columbian Exchange. Middle Passage is part of the Triangle Trade. The Triangle Trade isn't always the Middle Passage, right? So that's where you can kind of get. Since we're talking about this, on page 4 of your study guide is mercantilism. I just want to touch on that too, because we talked about it in class, but didn't really use the term mercantilism too much, but it was in your activity number 6, mercantilism. So I just want to make sure we're all. Okay. Can anyone say like what they have written down already for mercantilism? The bottom of page 4. You just want me to give a definition? Mercantilism, at the bottom of page 4.
Government regulation.
Yeah, so it's essentially a form of capitalism. Specifically, it has to do with a mother country and its colonies. Okay, so we've been talking about all the mother countries like France, England, Spain, and all the colonies it has. The mother country wants to use the colonies to get the resources, to get the wealth. They want to use the colonies to attain resources, specifically easy to make money off of resources, like gold, right? The easiest resource to make money off of because everybody wants gold. Okay? Any precious metals like that, you can find a colony that has gold in there. That's great. That's going to make you a whole bunch of money because everyone wants gold. Other hard to get resources could be things like tobacco, specific places that aim to grow tobacco well, or sugar, or rice. Very specific places where you can find those resources. That's where we can get the stuff and we can bring it back to the mother country, make money off it. Even things like lumber. Where England's saying, oh, we need more lumber so we can make more furniture out of it or something like that, but we don't want to cut down our trees here. Oh, great, let's go cut down all the trees in the colonies because I don't live there and I still get all the benefit from the resource and I can make something of it and sell something of it. The more resources you can attain, the more money you end up receiving. And mercantilism is all about the more money you have, the more power you have. The more money you have compared to the other mother countries, more power you have over them. Remember, all these countries like France and Spain and England are competing with each other. And so if they have more money, they have more power and can use that power against the other country. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I have a question of the chess.
Okay.
How do they have conflict over
the land? So they're going to have conflict over the land because tobacco requires lots of land. Okay. And yes, yep, in the Chesapeake. Because specifically, remember, England's like, oh, tobacco's great. Everyone wants to smoke tobacco. You shouldn't, but they're like, tobacco's so great. Let's sell more of it. And they're like, well, in order to grow more tobacco, we need more land, right? And so they start spreading out. If we look at like Jamestown, when it first started, they weren't growing tobacco. What resource were they looking for? They were looking for gold. So they didn't have to take very much land away from Native Americans. In fact, Jamestown is on a swamp, and the Native Americans in the area are like, sure, like that's fine. We're not gonna like come at you because you're taking this little piece of land in a swamp. It doesn't really bother us. But when they start expanding and they need more land for their tobacco fields, that's when it gets into conflict because they start taking away land from Native Americans. And so there's a few smaller wars that we didn't really take notes on, but we see wars with natives. For example, Lord De La Warr was an English colonist, fought against Native Americans in the area. You might recognize the name Lord De La Warr. Have anyone heard about this before? There's actually a future U.S. state named after him. Delaware, De La Warr. So that's where that name came from. And so tobacco leads to this conflict, right? Because it creates more conflict because they need more land. And we see similar things happening in New England, right? Eventually they're going to need more land for growing wheat. They're going to need more land to cut down trees for lumber, and that's going to lead to conflict as well. House of Burgesses. First of all, you should definitely know it's in Virginia. You should know it's a legislature, so it's a government body, creates laws. For the colony. It's the first example of a legislature in the Americas where people can actually elect representatives to create these laws. The problem is what were the demographics of the people chosen to be representatives? They were rich, white men. Rich, white, male landowners. So all the power is concentrating to the landowners, and those who don't have money, like indentured servants, they don't have any power in the House of Burgesses itself. Many of them are able to, or some of them are able to vote. However, I'm questioning myself. I can't remember if there were property requirements for voting. There might have been property requirements in voting for who the representatives are. So indentured servants might not even have power to vote for the representatives. I can't remember exactly. But the thing that we need to just know is that the people who were in the House of Burgesses were always the rich landowners. And eventually that leads to conflict, right, with the indentured servants in the Bacon's Rebellion.
I was wondering, what's the reason for that?
Reason for Metacom's War is in New England, them trying to get more land. The English are trying to spread out to get the lumber and the wheat, and that because it takes so much land, they're encroaching on the land of Native Americans. And Metacom's War is basically like the last gasp of Native American resistance against English expansion in New England. After that point, there's really no big conflicts anymore.
Expanding.
The English. No. Printer Revolution. So the printed books are not new at this time. However, they're getting cheaper. They're getting cheaper. And so because books are becoming more available, it's going to spread ideas. Okay. What are some examples of ideas that are being spread through books? Christianity, like the Great Awakening. We talked about in the 1730s. What else is a big intellectual change in the 1700s? Enlightenment. And this is also an example of, we talked before about like seeds of independence. A print revolution is going to be a seed of independence, or a seed for independence. Because what we see in the independence movement is books carry ideas, words carry ideas, which is going to push for independence, like the book Common Sense, like different speeches that were printed and shared throughout the colonies that talked about independence movements, right? Like the Declaration of Independence itself. All of that is the fruit or culmination of the print revolution of the 70s. Okay. Any other questions before we finish up? Yeah, classes soon. We'll stop there, everybody.